The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Witter. I'm a senior principal with NEOS, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar focused on KPIs, or Key Performance Indicators, entitled KPIs, Actionable Information or Colorful Graphics. Today, data is becoming a critical asset as people and budgets. With the explosion of retained data, companies are challenged with turning this data into actionable information. Determining what you want to measure, why you want to measure it, and how you're going to use that data to affect the desired results is the obstacle in front of us. How do you want to make your metrics actionable and not just colorful graphics? In this webinar, we'll hear how developing and utilizing metrics is challenging across departments and industries. And we'll explore the 5 common pitfalls that are faced when embarking a KPI effort. I'm joined today by Kim Dornish. Kim brings 23 years of delivery and IT leadership within the financial services and insurance industries. Throughout her career, she has developed and delivered multiple large-scale technology platform and business transformation projects in all delivery roles. She's also managed large life and annuity technology investment and maintenance portfolios, establishing and measuring portfolio performance metrics to maximize benefit attainment. And she is currently program manager for a U.S.-wide business and technology transformation effort for Catlin, based in Atlanta. Also joining us today is Jason Frayne. Jason is a senior retirement industry executive with over 15 years of experience in the retirement product development environment. Jason previously worked with Guardian Life, Company of America, and Hartford Financial Services Group. While at the Hartford, Jason held various leadership roles in their retirement plans product development area, and was a key member of acquiring 3 businesses. Jason is a graduate of the University of Hartford with a BA in Actuarial Science, summa cum laude. He is also a fellow of the Society of Actuaries and a member of the American Academy of Actuaries. Also joining us is Brian Harris. Brian brings 25 years of experience in technology and business at world-class organizations. He is currently the Senior Strategy Consultant at NEOS, leading and working and advising clients on IT successful implementation of large-scale transformations and change programs. He has been a leader in various KPI projects in large insurance companies, financial services, and healthcare companies as well. Early in his career, Brian ran insurance and technology consulting verticals for infrastructure provider, was a partner at Accenture, and holds multiple degrees from MIT. Kim and Jason will share with us their views on KPIs, their importance to their role in company success, the challenges they have faced when identifying and utilizing them, and what lessons they've learned. Brian will give us the view across different industries, sharing with us the similarities and differences to what Kim and Jason have experienced. And Brian will also speak about the NEOS KPI Discovery Model that helps companies avoid these pitfalls and achieve the desired outcome. Just a little housekeeping. After we hear from Kim, Jason, and Brian, we'll open it up to a Q&A session. For those participating online, you can submit your questions at any time via the question tab in your webinar panel. I have one of my colleagues at the ready to gather the questions. So let's get started. Kim, can you speak to how KPIs are used in the world of project management, why they are used, what some of the challenges have been in creating them and using them?
Great, thank you, Scott. I'm happy to be here. This is a really important topic for project and program managers, I think, because we're always being asked to track where we are and how we're doing, and are we really where we're supposed to be in our project life cycle, to make sure that we're proactively looking at any risks or issues or challenges that we're having in hitting our targets. So in my mind, KPIs are most important for program and project managers to manage performance of the team delivering the solution as well as progress to the plan. I do believe that fewer, very specific KPIs are better. Too many measurements and too much data overflow tends to become a distraction to the project team. So really trying to pick those few handful, very specific KPIs that are important to the project team and to the project sponsors, I think are key. I also think it's key to develop processes and tools that you're using throughout your project delivery cycle to make sure that capturing the data that goes into measuring the KPIs is part of the work you're doing rather than an extra step to gather that data. Again, to make sure that it's not distracting the project team from their goal of development and delivery. Project managers really care about schedule, cost, resources, putting the right person to the right task, scope of the work, quality of the work, and ultimately benefit attainment. You're doing a project for a reason to drive a business benefit, and how all these are interconnected. And that's really important because all of these play against each other and are interconnected. So when you're thinking about KPIs, it's really important to understand what's most important to the project and to understand that enabling that parameter and that KPI could create a negative impact on some others. So for instance, if schedule is the most important thing that you're measuring, cost and scope might suffer. Conversely, if scope is the most important thing to attain the business benefit, you might have to trade off schedule and cost. And when I think about KPIs, I think the most successful ones are really being viewed from the outside in, from a business sponsor's or executive's role. And mostly what they care about is to make sure that we're getting the full value out of the investment that we're making in the project. Lots of projects and programs take a lot of capital and a lot of investment away from other things in the business. So a lot of times I'm getting asked the question, or am I getting the full value from the investment? And that really comes down to understanding how resources are utilized. Are you getting the full value of every hour that is worked or billed to the project? Making sure that you're on schedule and tracking to the ultimate value and the goals that you're trying to deliver upon. And that's pretty easy to see when you're using contract staff because you can get invoices and measure against outcomes. It's a little harder to see about internal employees or fixed costs within an organization. Are you really getting the productivity yield from those resources, given that not every hour worked is an hour that forwards the project plan? So creating KPIs and targets around productivity and tracking work utilized against progress made to the plan is really important. Ultimately, tracking progress against your plan is always important. So really, again, understanding hours and estimates of tasks and activities that are being done against budget and against your timeline. So really making sure you're breaking down the work to the right level and you're able to track the progress to that, and being able to always challenge your resources to combat the perpetual I'm 99% done all the time. And things to look about here with KPIs are number of milestones that you've hit or missed, the number of scope changes that you might be incurring and change controls along the way, the percentage or the number of assumptions that have changed since you started are all key indicators that you should be tracking to ensure that you're indeed on track and not dealing with scope creep or other issues that might be slowing you down, or hidden issues that might come back and challenge you later. And ultimately, sponsors are always concerned about making sure that ultimately, after spending all this money and investment, I'm getting a product that delivers to expectations, that the scope I asked for is complete, and that the benefit I'm looking for is going to be realized. So tracking mechanisms there and indicators are really tracing requirements back to capabilities and business case, making sure that you're prioritizing your requirements and your backlog to ensure that you're throwing all of your investment and resource commitment to those high priority requirements and not wasting your time on low value or no value requirements or nice to haves. And again, tracking things like scope creep and changes to assumptions are really important here, because higher priority items that are going to drive business benefit might come in that need to be evaluated and potentially prioritized higher than the low priority items. and making sure that you're managing that backlog appropriately and tracking those KPIs against the benefit. I'll turn it back to you, Scott.
Great. Thanks, Kim. Jason, I'd like to turn to you now, ask you the same questions, but take it from the product or viewpoint. So how are KPIs used when assessing a successful product or product launch in the markets that you would go into?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. First, I just want to say thank you for having me on the webinar today. KPIs definitely are an important thing to look at from a product development, product management perspective, and even taking a step back at the overall product offering being put out on the street for your clients. I think in my past experience when looking at KPIs from a product perspective, I mean, they really break down into two groups, and that's revenue and expense drivers. And I guess that really should be no surprise that the focus would be on growing the top line and bottom line with the focus on the revenue and expenses. From a revenue standpoint, it's really not just focusing on the revenue per se, but it's really the things that are driving the revenue growth. For example, in my past in the retirement plan industry, a couple of the most important revenue drivers and KPIs that I'm used to looking at are average account balance and average participant contribution. Really, there's a significant amount of revenue that's asset-based and driven by the size of the accounts and how quickly they'll grow. So those are just examples of the things that I'm used to looking at. But it really is those drivers of revenue that are important from a product perspective that are going to focus you on the things that are important from really a delivery perspective. And really from the expense standpoint, it's a little bit more straightforward in my experience in that you want to look at your actual high-level unit costs. I think the most important thing from a product perspective there and really from an overall finance perspective is making sure you have the right units or widgets for each of your marginal costs. You want to make sure that really you're, pricing and developing a product that is going to have, sort of the right alignment of expenses versus revenue so that you're making sure you cover all of your costs and have profit built in there. Really from a business results perspective, though, as I said, it's about the revenue expense, but you've really also, from a product perspective, got to look at client outcomes. I mean, ultimately, the success of your business is what's going to lead, or the success of your client is what's going to lead to your business success. I know with my experience, we've looked at KPIs such as, participation and deferral rates and newer KPIs like income replacement ratios. Really things that are going to show the success that an overall plan, retirement plan is having, but really at the individual participant level as well, sort of how successful are they being, how likely are they going to be to retire. I mean, it's really those things that if you drive the success of your clients, that's going to improve your customer satisfaction, higher retention, and ultimately better results for your business. So it's really looking at how to do that from a product design perspective. And some of it's really looking at initiatives that will improve those results, whether it's new online calculators, as an example, in my industry, or retirement health reports, things like that, things that are going to be useful really to the plan sponsor, to the end participant, to help them improve their desired outcome. Those are the things that are going to really improve business results. So it's those KPIs that you've got to look at, from there to try and improve them. KPIs too can really have an impact, as I said, from a pricing perspective and a pricing model for your business. As you're looking at KPIs, sort of in the shorter and longer term, do you need to make short-term corrections to your pricing strategy from an overall product perspective, or can you get more aggressive and drive additional sales in the short term? As I mentioned before, one of the important KPIs I'm used to looking at is average account balance. And in a past life, we had looked at the growth in this figure and used the difference versus our pricing assumption as justification to reduce pricing for certain tranches of new business. And that really helped to propel sales as well in that segment. So those are things you can do from an overall product perspective as you're looking at the KPIs and then seeing the results of your business. And then really, as Kim talked about, I mean, one of the final pieces from a product perspective is that it's important to tie your projects and the success of those projects to KPIs. If you can't track the success, you don't know then if you were a success. So that's very important from a product perspective, whether you're designing a new product or making changes or enhancements to an existing product. You want to set up KPIs that are going to measure the changes that you've made so that you can track those results really at a high level and see if your results were successful. And it's not necessarily always just about the end result from a sales perspective either. It may be, as I said, sort of changes in the demographics of your business or whatever you think you're going to need to do to drive revenue growth or ultimately reduce expenses. I guess as well, from my perspective overall, it's not just important to look at sort of KPIs from a product perspective. Sort of product, a lot of times, that role oversees sort of a lot of other, functions or results of functions in different areas. So from a sales perspective, I mean, you really want to look at KPIs as well, and it's not just the obvious ones, sort of RFPs or bids or whatever you might look at, but you really want to look at things like activity as well, drilling down a little bit in terms of how many meetings did your sales team have with intermediaries or with prospective clients. It seems obvious, but a lot of times those things may not be getting tracked, and those are really the the drivers of future sales, sort of the activity of the sales team. There's obviously a direct correlation between the activity and sales for most businesses. The back end side of things, once a client is on board as well, you need to look at KPIs from a relationship management standpoint. And again, sort of what are the factors or KPIs that are going to drive better client success, and set those up specific to your business or industry, and make sure that your relationship management or however you're handling that with your clients, that their objectives and goals are really tied to those KPIs as well. Ultimately, you're trying to change the behavior of your employees, resulting in positive changes for your clients and your business overall. And even things you want to make sure from a client service perspective, you've got the appropriate KPIs set up, looking at satisfaction rates, if you're surveyed frequently, or even looking at SLAs. I know in a past life, SLAs were an important thing to track and make sure that we were living up to the standards that we had promised to our clients, and when those things didn't happen, reporting back to the client, that we hadn't met their expectation. And I think that open and honest relationship with the clients was appreciated. From a problems perspective, I mean, there's always problems with KPIs, unfortunately. The data might not always be available and not always easy to obtain, and that could be the client themselves may not provide you the data you need, or perhaps you didn't collect it historically, or it's in a system that's not easy to access. Sometimes that data is difficult to obtain. So you want to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success, even in just collecting the data. There are different ways to go about trying to solve that issue. Whether it's seeing if industry research is available to maybe backfill some of the history, or looking at partial data sets, or even using past experience from other employers or prior experience. I think the important thing from a KPI perspective is you've got to set a goal to start and then figure out how to get there. And in my experience, one of the biggest things you want to do is make sure that ultimately, if you're going to continue with the KPI reporting, that you're going to do it on an automated basis. I've seen a lot of KPIs that it started out on a manual basis, and they sort of fell by the wayside, just if the data collection was too difficult or not easily accomplished on a manual perspective. So as much of it as possible, you want to try and get automated. I think one of the other things with making decisions without KPIs in place is that, you don't really have a clear, picture of what the end result might be. And you may have to go back and change your decision, because a lot of times, sort of the expectation of what you thought was going to happen doesn't play out. And so, if you don't have a way to track that, or haven't looked at what your results have been leading up to that, it's difficult to try and get the appropriate decision made. I think sort of the last thing as well, from a KPI perspective, is that you need to revisit and refresh what KPIs you're looking at. Businesses and marketplaces, industries, they do change over time, and the KPIs you're looking at today may not be the appropriate KPIs in the future. So that's something you want to make sure that you stay on top of, and really, I think Kim mentioned it as well, is that you don't want sort of information overload. You want to make sure that you've got the appropriate KPIs, and it's not an overwhelming number of them. So that's really my experience from a product perspective with KPIs. Scott, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it. You had definitely hit on some of the key points that we said we want to cover around some of the pitfalls. So, Brian, I'm going to turn it to you now, and I want to ask you to kind of compare and contrast some of the things that you heard Kim and Jason say, but then also talk about, are you seeing similar things across industries? Are some of the challenges that companies face, are they the norms? And then also, how do we solve that through our discovery model?
Thanks, Scott, for the kind introduction. And I will touch on those three questions. The first point about the cross-industry nature of this topic. Secondly, some of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace for companies that are undertaking performance management KPI type work. And lastly, a NEOS perspective on the critical success factors for this space. But before I do that, as Kim and Jason were talking, I was writing down a few things that we'll touch on when we explore what we're seeing in the broader marketplace. I heard Kim say fewer is better, and we'll come back to the concept of the vital few KPIs in a bit. Kim and then also Jason talked about behaviors. Kim about project managers focusing on schedule, cost, quality, and the different variables. And then Jason around behaviors focused on business goals, the dual and sometimes competing or conflicting goals of driving revenue up and expenses down. And then Jason also mentioned what I would call scope, or the balanced scorecard view of this space, where it's important to look at multiple areas of KPIs: product, sales, operations, clients, financials. We'll come back to that in a little bit. And then finally, Jason summed up with the concept of automation and trying to get out of the business of this being a manual process, and that's something that we'll touch on in a little bit. But to come back to Scott's three questions, the first one around industry perspective, my experience is the concept of KPIs and performance management is something that is very important across all industries. It's very hot right now in organizations across industry, and the approach that we bring when we do this work is broadly applicable across industries. The thing that I would say that is different is the actual content. What I mean by that is that the specific KPIs, the specific metrics in a property and casualty organization would have to do with combined ratios and things like that. In an IT function where this is being applied, it would have to do with service level agreements and availability response time and so on. So although the concept and the value is very important cross industry, the details do matter within an industry or within a functional area. So let me turn next to Scott's second question about mistakes or pitfalls that we see, and based on our experience doing this more than a few times and in more than a number of industries. First one is what I would call focus, and referencing back to what Kim said, we often see organizations trying to do too many. One of my clients started off with a list of 500 KPIs that they were wanted to track and that wanted to be part of their dashboard. And as you can imagine, that dilutes the experience of focus on the top ones, the most important ones, the most critical ones, because the tricky part is trying to balance the trade-offs across the dimensions of KPIs. And in my experience, with more than the magic number of 12 to 20, it gets too many. In some cases, there are not enough, or maybe there are the wrong ones. But generally, our experience is pitfall number one for focus is too many. Second pitfall that I would touch on is what I'll call qualitative. It's the KPIs are too general, or they're not specific, or maybe they're not aggressive enough. We've had situations where the KPIs and the targets are set in a way that the dashboard is all green, which is good. It feels good. But if people who know the organization well feel that reality is not all green, there's complaints from customers, there's complaints from stakeholders, then showing a green dashboard really affects credibility, which we'll touch on in the next pitfall. But my perspective on this second one about qualitative is the KPIs have to be very specific, they have to be defined very objectively, and then benchmarked against your specific competitors in your industry. And that's what drives whether something is red, yellow, or green, not the internal view. Number three that I'll share is around credibility and accuracy. So I had a situation where there was a dashboard, a scorecard out there, and people in fact put a lot of work into feeding the data every day, every week, every month into this dashboard. And when we did some interviews to ask people, senior executives, if you use it, how do you use it, what do you think of it, the feedback that we got from the customers of this dashboard was that I never use it because I know what a couple of the numbers should be, and when I test on those, the numbers in the dashboard are different, and therefore I'm suspect of all of the numbers in the dashboard. It's not accurate, it's not credible. Now, there could be a number of reasons for that. It could be related, as I mentioned earlier, to the definitions. The scope could be different, but a big part of making these work is to have the credibility based on the accuracy and to test that with the data with some of the key stakeholders of the dashboard. The fourth one might even seem a little counterintuitive, but it's very interesting. I'll label the fourth one perfection. And what I mean by perfection is that I've seen organizations want this to be perfect and complete. And by doing that, we see that they just take too long to deploy. And what we like to do is think of, going back to those vital few, 12 to 20 KPIs, there might be what I call the rule of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So a third of the KPIs might be very easy to source, right? Might have the baseline data, might be very straightforward, might be very quick to bring that data into the dashboard. A third of them might be close, right? We might be able to use a proxy for that KPI, something not exactly as the definition specifies, but close enough that, that people will see the linkage. And a third of them might be very difficult. As Kim mentioned around projects, one of the KPIs that people like is the ROI on completed projects. Typically a very interesting KPI, but one that's in practice very difficult to measure for a variety of different reasons. So what we like to show, what we like to see is to use iterative development, get the dashboard out with maybe 2/3 of the KPIs, get people to start using it. Obviously, going back to pitfall number three, credibility, the ones that are out there have to be correct. but they don't all have to be out there. Instead of red, yellow, green, some of them can be shown in gray, and that's okay. As the quarters go and the years go, we can add additional data capture mechanisms to make it more complete and more perfect. Lastly, on number 5, pitfall, I'll label that one inefficiency. And this really ties back to a point that Jason made around the manual processes and automation. We see the scenario of the teams of analysts working till 4 in the morning, night after night, at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, to gather all the metrics from all the different source systems and make all the spreadsheets, and then try to anticipate every possible drill down that a manager might want to see, and create what I'm sure many of you have seen, the magic 100-page PDF document that gets emailed around to leaders in the organization. And as soon as that PDF comes out, first, it's out of date. Second, there's almost always a slice that when someone sees, they want a little bit different view, and that view then creates another cycle with your analyst team, which leads to the third point of your analysts that get burned out. So what we would like to see is a easy-to-use tool. There are a number of them out there in the marketplace, software-based or cloud-based tools that enable accessing through an automated way various databases and source systems, and very efficient drill down for different views into the data directly by the business customers without IT involvement in recoding a data feed. And people love that capability, and it also drives, as Jason mentioned, the efficiency side. So I'm just going to wrap up with Scott's third question very briefly and talk about NEOS's views and capabilities in this space. Our perspective is that it's all about behaviors. It's all about accountabilities. You heard Kim mention that. You heard Jason mention that. I'm sure you see that from your perspective. But it's not about the pretty graphics. It's about driving the behaviors and driving the accountability across the organization. And what we do is we start with the vision. Could be a business vision, could be a technology vision, could be a vision for a particular department. And we turn that somewhat general vision into more specific operational goals. And by writing the operational goals in a particular way, we can then translate those goals into the vital few. You can guess my answer, 12 to 20 of them, KPIs. And from those KPIs, the work to do is to source them, to benchmark them, making sure that we have very good, tight definitions for each, and then set the targets and evaluate the targets against the baselines. By doing that, we can have the red, yellow, green indicators with credible data sourced back to automated feeds, and do all this in this, what I would call a rapid prototyping environment. Quickly building something, getting some feedback, refining it, starting with a few of the KPIs, and then extending and enhancing it over time. So I think with that comments, the first point around the cross-industry nature of this topic, the second point around the 5 pitfalls we see around focus, qualitative, credible, perfect, and efficiency, and just a little bit of NEOS perspective in this space. I think I'll turn that back over to Scott, who will lead us through some follow-ups. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that, and thank you, Kim and Jason. Now I'd like to open it up to questions. Just as a reminder, you can submit a question via your WebEx panel on the question tab, and we'll give a few seconds to queue up some questions. Okay, we've got one that came in. Brian, I'm going to pass this back to you. The question came in is, why is this topic becoming such a focus for companies all of a sudden? maybe all of a sudden, maybe not the right word, but seems to be much more in the press, in the vernacular nowadays. So why is that?
So I would start my answer to that around big data, right? There's a lot of activity, and you read every day around big data, lots of data out there. Our problem is not enough data. Our problem is almost too much data. And I would see that the senior executives that I speak with are just inundated with many, many emails, many, many views, many, many analyses, many, many points of perspective. And they're trying to figure out, what do I do today? And because there's so much data out there, there's a huge interest in make this simple, tell me the top few things I need to pay attention to, and then have all of that data feed that perspective so it's actionable. And I would say that the more and more data that's out there and possible to look at will make this concept of trying to figure out what the vital few pieces of data should be, and being able to quickly visualize that, drill that down, and slice across different dimensions even more important as executives figure out what's the behavior I need to take, what's the behavior I need to model, and what are the priorities that I need to set for my organization.
Great, thanks. We have another question. This is from a project perspective. So Kim, I'll turn this one to you. Stakeholders always seem to want to know how confident are you in the date, the estimate. How can you use KPIs to help address that question and address the concerns?
That's a great question. So I guess I look at it in a couple of different ways. Certainly the measurements of schedule and tracking to budget and making sure you understand what your targets are important. And as everybody knows, through the life cycle of a project, when you start out, there's a high variability to those target dates and estimates because you just don't know what you don't know. Projects are a process of peeling back the onion and driving deeper into understanding what the ultimate goals are of the project, the requirements against those goals, how you're going to build against those goals, etc. So I think it's really important as you start to understand with your stakeholders what's important to them. Is it the date? Is it the dollar amount to spend? Is it the attainment of the benefit based on certain assumptions of scope? To really be explicit all along the way of your phases of delivery, whether you're doing classic waterfall or an iterative agile type of approach, to talk about what assumptions are in place as you go and always tracking those against the target of where you're trying to land and what is actually taking you to fulfill those goals. So I just look at it, it's probably less about the KPIs, you got to use them, but it's more about the transparency and how you're tracking to them, talking about percentage or number of assumptions that have changed along the way, the number of times scope has changed, and being very rigorous about exposing that and talking about that and optioning that with your sponsors, and talking about how changes in those different measures impact the target that you're trying to land on.
Great, thanks. Jason, this one's for you. You mentioned a little bit in your section, you talked about how sometimes when KPIs can be used wrong. So could you give a little bit more, maybe an example of an experience you've had where KPIs were used in the incorrect fashion, and what did it lead to, and then how did you get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one example that I can think of is just when really looking at more so, I guess, the wrong KPIs. Sort of an expectation that you're going to have a KPI that is around revenue, a revenue driver such as average account balance. And if your revenues aren't necessarily lined up to that because of the way you've done a certain, built a certain product, you may have an issue. The KPI that works for one product may not work for another product, even in the same marketplace, depending upon, you know, the structure of the product, the revenue stream, sort of what's important for that specific product. And I know certain products that I've worked with in the past, a particular one that was really targeted towards the very smallest clients within the 401k industry. You know, we had looked at KPIs around average balance, and it wasn't really the appropriate measure for us because we had put in place a little bit different pricing structure for that product. And sort of, you know, we learned pretty quickly that we wanted to look at a different measure for us. But I think it ties back to being certain that from a product perspective, you're looking at the right measures for each of your products, and they may be different.
Yeah, I think that makes me think and tie to what Brian said too about making sure you're looking at the critical few, but you're asking what do we want to measure, why are we measuring it, to make sure it's the right measurement before you start making decisions. So I think that's a great example. Thank you. Brian, one more question for you. We talk about these challenges that you see, the pitfalls. Do you see it mainly more in large companies? Does the size of the company impact some of the pitfalls that they fall into?
Sure, and just to build on what Jason just mentioned, you know, in terms of picking those, the right KPIs and the behaviors, you know, sometimes people put, you know, just the expense management one there, right? And if it's only about expenses, you know, it's almost very straightforward to manage an organization around expense control, but that might have very different consequences around employee morale, around customer service, customer satisfaction, and to reinforce Jason's point, picking the right ones can really head an organization in a certain direction around behaviors. And then Scott, to your question about the size of the organization that where this work is interesting or beneficial, it really, in my experience, applies to organizations of all sizes. And what I mean by that is that a very large organization, right? I've worked with multi-billion-dollar organizations, might have a dashboard, a set of KPIs at the most senior enterprise level that have to do with maybe stock price performance, et cetera, those kinds of things, maybe enterprise risk, board level risk issues. And if there are 12 to 20 KPIs at that level, then for each person or leader within the organization at a level below or the next level from the C-level executives, they might have one or two KPIs of that enterprise-wide dashboard that for them then expand into their own 12 to 20 and so on down. So what my point here is that these can be driven from the top down with 12 to 20 at the top level, expanding into department and team level views, but it can also go bottom up, right? It could start with a small department, one team, even as a person. I've seen excellent high performance managers have their own dashboard, their own KPIs for what they want to achieve during the course of a year, and then building that up about how does that flow up within the organization. What you end up seeing by thinking about this way is almost this pyramid, where there's a dashboard that covers a very large organization, a very large company, And you might see dashboards that cover only departments or teams or individuals. And the same thing can be extrapolated to think about the applying this to small companies and large companies across an industry as well.
Thanks, Brian. That was our last question. I want to just personally thank Jason, Kim, and Brian for sharing their thoughts and insights on this topic. It's definitely a very key topic nowadays, and there's a lot of good information out there. For more information about our KPI discovery model, for a replay of the webinar, as well as some of our related webcast information, please visit our website at www.neosllc.com. I want to thank everybody for participating today and joining us, and we look forward to having you in other webinars. Thank you.